Medical innovation starts with medical discussion. Talking about the future and what comes next with Project Medtech.
Hello, everybody. I'm Lindsay Deneen, Director of Marketing and Engagement at Project Medtech, and welcome to another episode of the Project Medtech podcast. If we can help you in any way, or you would like to suggest a future guest, you can email us at info@projectmedtech.com. If conversations like this are helpful, that's exactly why we bring people together at our signature events, the Midwest Showcase, the Startup Symposium, and Coming to America. For more on our events that include networking, education, and pitch competitions for startups, check them out at www.projectmedtech.com. We even have sponsorship options if your company is also dedicated to accelerating medical technology to impact patient lives. So reach out today to get involved. The Project Medtech podcast is proudly sponsored by Ward Law. Ward Law Office LLC is a boutique law firm specializing in the practice of patent and trademark law. They are committed to providing inventors, entrepreneurs, and businesses of all types with personal and professional services and are flexible to meet your unique needs. It is their goal to both educate on how to secure valuable patent and trademark protection and to provide high-quality services at rates affordable to independent inventors, startups, and small businesses alike. Without further ado, let's dive in.
All right, Mark, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
Yeah. So, Mark, let's start with the background, an introduction to who you are, your background in the med tech space, and then kind of leading up to what you currently do now.
Sure. So, Mark Domyahn, I'm a partner at JD Lymon Group. We are a reimbursement consulting practice that focuses on the U.S. market in terms of medical technology. So, figuring out coverage, coding, payment, reimbursement, market access, health economics, and reimbursement. Call it what you will, but we're focused on the money. How do you get paid for your medical technology, whether that be implantable, insertable, software as a service, durable medical equipment, a little bit with biopharmaceuticals and drugs, but primarily technologies that go in, on, or around the body. That's where we focus. I've been in healthcare my entire career and have been doing this type of work dedicated since 2003. I started my career in reimbursement in companies. So I started at Medtronic, went to a couple of startups, including CardioMEMS for a few years, and then went back to bigger companies because of the type of work, at least for me, was given where the startups were, it was needed to work on a portfolio of products. So I went to Zimmer in the orthopedic space for 4.5 years or so, and then moved over to St. Jude Medical for 5 years before they got acquired by Abbott. And then in 2016 was time for the next challenge. So I left St. Jude and started my own consulting practice, doing exactly the same thing. So helping companies manage through Medicare and getting new codes and getting new payment rates and all that kind of stuff. And in that time, I had known a couple of gals that were at the JD Lymon Group, had formed that team, and we started to do more work together, particularly as I was doing my own consulting practice, and the marriage made too much sense. So we started doing a lot of collaboration. I joined forces with them in 2018 and have been doing that ever since.
Super cool. So at JD Lymon Group, I want to dig into your background more, but at JD Lymon Group, do you work with startups, medium-sized, strategics, kind of companies of all sizes?
Absolutely. We work with, the individual single company that it's developing their product, thinking about going to early feasibility or pivotal study, all the way through commercialization. And then what happens, whether that's through acquisition or continuing to grow. We also work with, some of the Fortune 500 medical device companies, just depending on what they need, whether it's guidance, advice, fresh set of eyes, diligence, all those sorts of things. So we run the gamut in terms of our client base from really small to really large companies.
Yeah, awesome. And we're, at least me personally, and some of us at Project Medtech are familiar with the work you've done. You've worked with a couple clients of ours and have done a great job. So definitely love the work you've done for those clients. Okay, I fascinating background. Especially the Medtronic, Zimmer, St. Jude, Abbott transition. The St. Jude Abbott transition is still one of the funniest things I've ever seen live and in person. I was in Minneapolis and we were going to St. Jude the day I was at NAMSA. St. Jude was a client of ours.
Yep.
We were going to St. Jude. It was either the day or day after they announced the acquisition, and they were already changing the sign outside to say Abbott. It was crazy how fast it happened. But regardless, those are three, obviously, for large strategics, but all focus in different areas as well. How much of that matters when it comes to reimbursement, having specific expertise in a therapeutic area? And I want to compare it to like regulatory, right? In regulatory, there are definitely regulatory specialists who have a lot of experience in specific areas, and that can add value. But oftentimes, it's not like that drastic of a difference to go from, taking a vascular product through the market and then, doing a wound care product. And from a regulatory perspective, like it definitely matters, but I just don't think it matters as much. I think you could figure it out. How much of that is nuanced in reimbursement versus kind of crossover?
Well, in my experience, I would say reimbursement is more functional than it is therapeutic space. So I've done a lot of cardiology, I've done a lot of urology, a lot of neuromodulation, a lot of orthopedics.
Yep.
In terms of from a reimbursement perspective, they all have their nuanced differences in who you're working with and talking to. But in terms of fundamentally how the payment systems work, getting yourself new codes, those sorts of things, it's the same regardless. So we often get the question, you have a lot of deep experience in this space. And fortunately, I work with 4 other partners we've all been doing this a long time. So I don't know that there's a therapeutic area we haven't touched, and most of them we've touched pretty deeply, which is nice. So it's great to have that experience and can pull precedents and all that kind of thing. But really, getting a CPT code, there's a set process for it. And there's nuance if I'm talking about a urology product versus a ENT product or cardiology product, but still the process is the process. So to me, it's still more functional, but then you overlay on top of that if you've got the therapeutic experience. So again, I've done a lot of cardiology in my career. That
helps.
certainly helps because I understand the space a little bit better, but functionally the processes are very similar.
Yeah. I guess it would probably be similar to like, hey, have you done a 510K before? Have you done a de novo? Have you done a PMA? Right. Very similar. Okay. Very cool. I'm curious, I think most of our listeners are going to be early stage innovators. There are definitely strategics that listen into the podcast. We know that there are investors. There are other service providers, but there's a lot of small to medium-sized companies that listen in. And I'm curious, what were some of the things you took from Medtronic to Zimmer to St. Jude to Abbott that you now apply so much today in the work you do with these companies that you're working with, and maybe focus more on the smaller to medium-sized companies?
Yeah, I think for the smaller companies, I learned this actually from my startup, is for a startup.
Oh, okay.
I'm still years away I'm doing my early feasibility, got through pivotal. I was at a couple of startups and I moved on because there wasn't work for me to do. We were in hurry up and wait mode. So I did a bunch of work and then we got to go run a clinical trial, the champion trial in the case of CardioMouse. Well, that's 2 or 3 years later. What am I going to do in the meantime? So, which is why I went back to a big company like would have been Zimmer because of the portfolio I could work on. And I think one of the things for small companies that's important is to get your reimbursement strategy. It's going to sound a little self-serving as a reimbursement consultant, but get your reimbursement strategy settled early. When you start thinking about your regulatory pathway, the regulatory is absolutely critical. You've got to get through the FDA, but you will likely find a path through the FDA. What that does is gives you the ability to go to market. It doesn't guarantee anything in the marketplace. Reimbursement is where the kind of rubber meets the road because we're starting to talk about money, physician money, hospital money. How do I support my sales price that I'm looking to get? And a lot of things change over time. So it's not like, well, I'll worry about it when I get done with the FDA. Our guidance is with us or somebody else, however you do it, is when you start thinking about your regulatory pathway, you need to be thinking about your reimbursement pathway and understanding where do you fit in? What do you need to do? Do you need new codes? Do you want new codes? have an idea of your price. That's a common misconception too, is like, I want as much as I want, I can get, Mark. What should I set my price at? And I come back as, what's the value of your technology? You need to argue it's more than just reimbursement. It's clinical value. Where do you fit in the treatment continuum? Side effects, all these other things factor in. Are you offsetting other costs anywhere? Are you treatment of last resort? Are you fifth to market, first to market? Those sorts of things all factor into what your price is. And what, if I can, doing my job as best I can is trying to say, well, if the price is here, I want my reimbursement to be at least this high to help support that ASP. And the sooner you think about that, and what we have seen, particularly the last 5 years, is investors have gotten savvier. They're not worried about your FDA strategy. They're worried about your reimbursement strategy, because how are you going to get paid? Because at the end, of it, you can't get paid. You're not going to get adopted, or your valuation is going to go down significantly, and you're not going to exit the way you want to. So getting solid reimbursement is so thinking about that early, and what is it going to take, and making there's some typically some choices. Clinical trial design, how much study, how much evidence I'm going to have pre-launch. And obviously you've got pressures the other way of, I want to get to market as fast as I can. And you've got investor milestones. All those things need to be weighed in. So one of the things at the larger companies, we, even at the time, struggled was bringing reimbursement to the table with regulatory and sales and marketing to true business strategy that includes all of the components. And that's where we come in, and others that would say, hey, this is what your reimbursement looks like, and let's weave it into your overall business strategy, because you can't do reimbursement without regulatory. I would argue you can't do regulatory right without reimbursement as well, because getting to market without a plan on how you're going to get paid is not going to work.
That's right. Yeah, it's one of the most common errors. I mean, it feels like we've been doing the podcast since 2020. Done 70 episodes by the time this gets released, maybe 265. And we've also worked with, from a consulting standpoint, probably 150 startups now, and since we started the company. And that is still the number one error. Our people come to us with a fully baked regulatory strategy and then say, yeah, we haven't given too much thought to reimbursement yet. And I always say, then how can you possibly have a regulatory strategy? Because we don't even know the claims we want to make. We don't know our commercial strategy. And the line I use, which, when you started talking, it just made me think of it, is I always tell people this: the FDA doesn't buy your product.
They don't.
And so, and so it's just, it is a milestone. It's just not as big of a milestone. But the one pushback we hear is, hey, reimbursement changes frequently, which I don't know. I'd be curious on your perspective on whether reimbursement changes frequently or not. But they say, well, we're still 5 years from the market, so we'll worry about that then, or it's going to change a lot, by the time we get there. And the pushback I kind of give them is, with reimbursement, if you can do a landscape analysis of what it is right now, then as it changes, it's much easier to monitor that.
For sure.
Yeah, is that so question to you is, does reimbursement change all that much? And do you see like some big ruling just overhaul a landscape? I mean, I guess we maybe saw that in wound care, but I'd be curious on your perspective here.
Yeah, no, it's getting a landscape is where we usually start with our small clients, is to say, understand, if we were to launch today, and we know you're 3 years out or 5 years out, whatever, but if we launch today, what do things look like? Do you have codes that apply? If they do, what do they pay? What are the payment rates? And does that commensurate with your goals and what you want to charge in the market? Where are you going to be business wise? Again, figuring out where are you fourth to market? Because in some ways, that is a easier strategy from a reimbursement perspective if you're going to be the fourth TAVR valve to market. Okay, because TAVR, Edwards laid the groundwork with Medtronic following with their valve. And now, if you want to be a TAVR valve, there's a set pathway. You're likely not going to get paid more, but you've got an established pathway. That can be very good. It can also be not as good if you don't have the codes, you don't have the payment. So understanding what that looks like, and then what it's going to take based on the rules today. Can rules change? Absolutely. Wound care they were fraught with issues, and so Medicare stepped in and said, we want to change how we're doing things. Big changes don't often happen. Sometimes it can be death by paper cuts, but it absolutely makes sense to periodically, well, pick your head up, look around and say, what has changed? Because it could happen on the regulatory side too. It could happen on the clinical side. Your clinical trial doesn't go the right way. What if your endpoints need to change? I got to be able to pivot. So it's not that I need someone watching every single reimbursement policy change every single minute of every single day, but picking your head up once in a while and saying, if I were to develop you a strategy today, a landscape, and say, here's what I think we need to do to get you on the market in 4 years. We need to refresh that periodically, at least pick it back up and say, are the same assumptions still apply? Because a lot of it's based on your assumptions. What's your timing? What's your indications? What's your FDA pathway? Have any of that changed? Can you get breakthrough device designation or not? There are some policy changes that do occur. We live in interesting times from with this administration, previous administrations, we're spending a lot on healthcare. The debt there's a lot of things that are moving parts. So you just got to keep your head a little bit on a swivel, just making sure if there's any policy changes that are going to dramatically impact, good or bad, they can go both ways. Usually they're not always as positive as you'd like, but understanding some things can happen around you, making sure that you understand the ramifications and what you can do to influence it.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, reimbursement. Oftentimes when we talk to people about reimbursement, I think people have it in their head that just means you're evaluating payers. Like, are payers going to pay for this technology? Over the years, I've learned it is much more than that. And it does revolve around the other major player in this, which is the healthcare provider, whether it be an ASC or a hospital system or whatever it is. I think for years, especially when I was learning the industry, it was like, oh, is there a code that a hospital can use to get money from the insurance company? And that was it. And then I learned much more that it's, yes, we need to evaluate, will a payer pay for this? But we also need to evaluate the mechanics of how this hospital system or healthcare provider actually gets paid. So can you help add a little more color to that, to maybe just that overall strategy there? Because I think people are really focused on just, the Aetnas, the Anthems of the world, and whether they're going to pay for it or not. Reimbursement is much more than that.
Yeah, it really is. And it's beyond the question of, I just need a code. We'll get that question. We don't get it as often as we used to. We used to get all the time. I just need to know if I have a code. And it is significantly more than that. The reimbursement's often described as a three-legged stool: coverage, coding, and payment. And to focus on one, and not focusing on all three and understanding all three is kind of at your own peril. Each of them have their own aspects. And, coming back to a little bit earlier too, tying into what you were saying, one of the key things is follow the money. Okay. I'm a medical device manufacturer. I'm going to sell to two entities, in essence, the physician and the hospital, depending on where I'm doing. Maybe it's the physician if it's a clinic-based procedure, and understand, and maybe it's a mix. They can urology can often be done, products can often be done inpatient, outpatient, ASC, or the office. Okay. Depending on what procedure we're talking about as well. And so understanding who you'd be selling to, where they want to do the procedure, where they can do the procedure, and how that entity is going to get paid, whether it's going to be a physician clinic, freestanding physician owns his or her own clinic, or owns or partly owns an ASC. Those are very different economics than if I'm going to go down the street to an academic medical center and sell my technology there. And so, typically where the best place to start, or where we like to start, is codes. Is there a code that describes your technology and it's more about not so much your technology, but your procedure. What procedure are you doing? I'm replacing a aortic valve transfemorally. Well, that's TAVR. There's a code for that. And so if that code adequately describes your procedure, can you live with then the corresponding payment tied to that? And then we come over the top is, what does the coverage look like from the Aetnas and Cignas and Humanas and Medicare? And what do they say? Because coverage doesn't guarantee you're going to have the right payment amount, but it does help to say, I will pay for this treatment under these conditions. And so understanding how those three come together, if you think of them as sort of as a Venn diagram, Where I want to be is right in the middle, where those three things overlap. And it takes time, and they're not linear or sequential. They all happen at the same time. Usually coding and payment can come before coverage, because coverage takes evidence, published evidence, not just, and one of the things that payers push back on the device industry, and I think with some credibility, is we don't always do the studies. We do the bare minimum to get through the FDA, and may not prove that their threshold is different than, FDA's threshold is safe and effective. Payers is more about medically reasonable and necessary. And now you're starting to talk to your point earlier. FDA is not writing any checks. Medicare and the payers are. So they are going to have a different bar. And that's where some of the issues can come up with, well, I did a study. The FDA said this was enough. And it's like, yeah, but payers don't care about the FDA. That's table stakes. That's okay. You're on the market. FDA said you're safe and effective. That doesn't mean I think you work. And I might pay $30,000 for your, procedure. So,
Yeah, Mark, this is so great. This is originally I'm still going to ask you about it. I wanted to talk about the NTAP program, but we've done some reimbursement podcasts, but we haven't done one succinctly on kind of like these gotcha high level strategy. We've gone into the mechanics of reimbursement, coding, language, all of these things, which has been great. But what you just said, you're hitting on, like, if I made a list of 5 things that it's like, hey, the FDA doesn't buy your product. Reimbursement isn't just the insurance company. You just hit on another point. Clinical evidence. I am so sick of companies telling me they don't need clinical evidence, and it's like, because the FDA has said they don't need it. But to your point, for reimbursement you do, and for clinical adoption you do. Like, you might be able to convince an early adopter physician
sure,
to use your product, but to get the physician who maybe just isn't so wrapped up into what the newest thing coming out is, but they're more wrapped up in, this is my job. It's 8 to 5. I got to do this. How do you integrate into that? You're going to need clinical evidence. You're just going to have it.
Well, I agree with you completely. And depending on what you're trying to do, especially for not the Me Too stuff. By the way, there's nothing wrong with the Me Too strategy, but if you're truly bringing something new and novel to the marketplace, it's not just about reimbursement. What about clinical guidelines factor into this? Once one and done. I'm going to do my one study for my PMA approval or whatever it is, or de novo, and I don't have to worry about collect everything post market. Isn't going to get you where you need to be from a variety of fronts, at least in my opinion, typically. And it does, and that's where, again, as we do the landscape, we talk to you about your clinical publication plan. What is it? Is it going to be sufficient from a reimbursement perspective? I'm not a clinical guideline expert, but that's part of it. That's beyond, like you said, I need evidence, publish or perish. Continue to prove you work, because no matter what, durability is one of the key questions payers ask. How long does this last? Well, I did a 6-month endpoint because that's what FDA said. Yeah, I don't care about 6 months. What happens at 1 year, 2 year, 5 years? Well, I don't have that data. I didn't collect it. Well, okay. Well, then I don't believe you necessarily work the way that I'm willing to pay for. And so having that evidence that kind of meets multiple masters. It's not just the FDA and any post-market surveillance you need to do, but it is thinking about clinical guidelines. It is thinking about payer coverage. It is thinking about convincing the marketplace. So if I'm fourth market, am I going to really I don't want to compete on price. That's a race to the bottom. We've seen that happen, when like stents, coronary stents are now a commodity. That's going to happen naturally. But if I'm coming forth to market, is there any way from a clinical evidentiary perspective I can show meaningful benefit? And meaningful benefit can mean different things to different people. Okay. So people talk about, hey, we're going to show the benefits to society. Society doesn't write a check. Okay. Abbott Northwestern here in Minneapolis does. That's a hospital. A physician clinic will write a check. If you can show benefit to them of using my fourth to market technology is faster, easier, and doesn't cost you any more than the first 3 that are on the market, that's good evidence, because that helps you with market adoption. Right. And so those factoring in where you are and where you think you will be by the time you get to market, and then what does it look like? I always want to start with the end in mind. Where do I want to land? Right. And work backwards, as opposed to I just got to worry about the next quarter and the next quarter and the next quarter. It's all about, and that's where we talk about with the landscapes, is It's not just when you commercially launch. It's not just getting NTAP or transitional pass-through. It's okay, well, what happens when they expire? Because they're temporary. They last up to 3 years and then they're done. Where do we want to be when we land so that we have a sustainable business, whether it's ours or someone's acquired it or whatever? But that's where we're also seeing strategic asking smarter questions about this is, well, where do you land 5 years after commercial launch? And everyone talks about the hockey stick. Oh, we're going to sell everything. Well, maybe if your reimbursement is right and everything else is lining up, including your clinical evidence and those sorts of things, that's where we're seeing, strategics are starting to ask more of those questions, as well as investors. So both, acquiree and acquirer are asking some really good questions.
Yeah. Okay. This is good. So the other one that I would add, we named kind of 3 of them. The other one I would add that I'd like you to maybe add some color to is this comes up, especially when we talk to our international companies, where I will tell them, when we're kind of going over the US healthcare system, I kind of give them an overview, but then I said, from a reimbursement perspective, something you have to be aware of. And when I say reimbursement, I'm not talking about just insurance. I'm talking about hospital systems as well, is that the name, the United States of America, is deceiving because it is not it's not like we're one singular united thing. We are 50 independent states, and within those independent states, you have drastically different healthcare systems that serve drastically different populations of individuals. Can you add a little more color to that? And you can take it from an insurance side as well, but even within, and that's a confusing map. If you look up like the reimbursement and coverages and how things are paid, I mean, you're talking about different payments in different geographies, I think, and different insurance plans and things like this. And so maybe add a little color to that. We don't have to go too in depth, but just beyond what I just described.
Yeah, I mean, it's the United States of America means not from a healthcare perspective. I don't know another healthcare system that is as fragmented as ours. Okay, There's a reason we spend what we spend on healthcare, because compared to the rest of the world, and that's a different debate for a different time in terms of the value we get. But you're talking about thousands of different entities, regardless of what I'm developing for my product, because you're talking Medicare. That's not Medicaid. Medicaid is the 50 states. You've got Medicare Advantage, which is contracted with private insurance. You got private insurance. You got Medicaid managed care. You've got TRICARE, which is military. You got the VA, which is a completely different system. And that's sort of just talking about payers. That's thousands of entities. Okay. Then you've got coding. And that's, if you're talking CPT, you're talking about the American Medical Association, which is a common misconception. CPT is held by a private entity, the American Medical Association, that they've been given that right to administer CPT codes. They're a private entity. They are a nonprofit, but they are a private entity. They are not beholden to rulemaking like Medicare is. I'm not arguing good or bad, but they're a very different entity. They're made up of physician societies who, guess what? They focus heavily on physician work. That's their job. Well, there's a lot of things tied into CPT codes that have nothing to do with the physician, including payment in ASCs and hospital outpatient. So now I got to introduce all of those different parties that have different financial incentives and different clinical incentives. And frankly, everyone's looking out for their best interest. So what's in their best interest might not align with you. So now I got to align with those groups. I got to deal with Medicare because they serve as my benchmark for everybody. The beauty of Medicare, for all of its faults, there's no entity is perfect. Medicare publishes everything. They tell me what they're going to pay for 2026. They're now telling me we're going to start paying in 2027. Okay. We're in that annual rulemaking cycle. They tell me their policy changes they want to implement. I don't like all of them. There's a lot of them I don't like, quite frankly, but some of them I do. And so I have at least a starting point. So I got to do all the engagement too with Medicare to make sure they're doing things that I need them to, or would really want them to do to keep my payments for the technologies and procedures that interest me the most at a level that's sustainable. And so it's so fragmented. And we have worked with a lot of international clients, and their heads start spinning pretty quickly when they're used to a single payer system in whatever country that they're, whether it be the UK or France has a prosthesis list. They understand those sorts of things. But when they come over here, when they come to the US market, if they've not experienced it before, when you start explaining all the intricacies and the various players that need to be influenced along the way, it's like, holy cow, no wonder you guys spend so much money here. And I'm like, well, that's why you're coming do because our prices are pretty high. So yeah, it gets complicated pretty quickly. And that's where, again, going back to understanding the reimbursement and follow the money. That helps navigate. I may not need to worry about these other players outside. If I'm purely in the inpatient hospital setting, that is very different than if I'm going to go to and sell into the physician clinic. And so I have different strategies associated. There are different strategies associated with that and different responsibilities, things I'm going to care more about and less about depending on where I'm going. So understanding, given it's so fragmented, which path do I think is most viable, and what paths do I take? If I'm in the outpatient setting, am I going to be in the ASC as well? Well, ASC is based on the hospital outpatient payment department. So I got to fix that first, even if I know most of my business eventually end up in the ASC. So that's part of the fragmentation. There's a lot of silos, and then you got to figure out when and if they're going to cross and do any overlap.
Awesome. Yeah, I appreciate that oversight. It's super helpful to have that next layer down of detail of what I was talking about there. Okay. With all that being said, let's talk about the NTAP program. And I think maybe explaining what it is, what it stands for. I hate abbreviations. And I do think that is like, when I first started the podcast, selfishly, it was a way for me to talk to people in the med tech space, learn a lot about things maybe I didn't know as much about, and help others learn, provide a pathway. Someone else can listen to the same conversation I'm having. And one of the things it was my pet peeve was I felt like on calls, I was constantly saying, oh, okay, 510K, that's a new acronym. CRO, okay, that's a new acronym. Oh, that means 4 different things. It's like, so let's start there, but then kind of describe what it is and maybe why so many people are asking about it.
Absolutely. So stepping back right now, we'll focus on hospital inpatient services. I'm going to be in the hospital for a week getting whatever procedure done, that cabbage procedure. There's another acronyms for everything, right? Coronary bypass.
Yep.
The payment rates, the way they're set, and again, we use Medicare as the benchmark because Medicare is the only payer in this country that consistently publishes its payment rates. They tell you in advance. It's all prospective payment system. So you do a procedure today, you know what you're going to get paid. Okay. You do a procedure a month from now, you know what you're going to get paid. Well, in order to set those payment rates, they're based on data from 2 years ago. So by definition, any new technology that I were launched today hasn't been factored into those payment rates. Okay. So back in the day, and this is a 20-some-year-old program, Medicare or Congress told Medicare to create a program. On the inpatient side, it's called the New Technology Add-on Payment, NTAP. Okay. And NTAP is for qualifying technologies that need to meet 3 criteria. You got to be new, and there's definitions around that. It's not just FDA approval. You got to meet a cost threshold, and then you have to demonstrate your substantial clinical improvement over existing technologies. That is a really hard bar to get over, and you have to do it when you launch. So it's not, I'll go collect data after post-launch for 3 or 5 years, and I'll come back and get more money. There's a window in which you can apply and you can be granted the new technology add-on payment. Okay. If you can get it, it provides the hospital still gets a single DRG payment for every discharge in the inpatient setting. So I stay a week, I stay 2 weeks, doesn't matter. You get one number. So the hospital's always going to get that one number. But if I have NTAP on my technology, I can get incremental payment on top of that DRG at 65% of the cost of my technology. So if my technology costs $10,000, it's an extra up to $6,500. Like I was $20,000, it's $13,000, and everyone else can do the math based on what they have. What is helpful with this program is you're able to talk to hospitals and say, at least for your Medicare patients or a percentage of your Medicare patients, there's the ability to get this extra money. And when you're going and talking to your value analysis committees, you got your VAC packets that you're saying, here's all my clinical benefit. I have separate coding because there's codes that administer that. And then I've got separate payment, at least for a percentage of the patients you're going to treat, changes the conversation and takes it a little less off of price. Okay. And it focuses more on the clinical value. Is it a guarantee you can get the price you want from a hospital system? No, but it bolsters your argument to say, oh, by the way, we've been able to get this extra payment. Okay. And like I said, it's a window. You get 2 to 3 years, and then the window closes. And there's some other things to consider, again, where we land. but for sake of time, I won't get into that here. But the NTAP is really the only way in the Medicare hospital inpatient setting where you can launch as a new technology and say, hey, look, I'm getting incremental payment for a period of time for my technology. Okay. Historically, that has been difficult to achieve because, again, you need to demonstrate substantial clinical improvement over existing therapies. And it's not well defined. It's not like CMS will tell you in advance, hey, I'm doing this clinical trial. If I hit these endpoints, will that demonstrate to you a substantial clinical improvement? Unlike the FDA, CMS won't tell you that. You work with the FDA, you negotiate with the FDA. These are the endpoints. You hit them, you're probably going to get your PMA approval or your de novo clearance, whatever. CMS doesn't do that. They say it's on you to tell us because let's see how things shake out. And that's over time. There haven't been a ton of these NTAPs awarded because, again, it's a hard bar to do because you're doing it at the time of commercial launch. So think of it as your pivotal study. Think as superiority, a head-to-head against something, not just I did a single arm study and I did exactly what I had a composite endpoint of these endpoints that are clinically been established. That's typically not enough. CMS wants comparative data. Well, in fiscal year 21, so we're going back to October of 2020, Medicare made it easier under what's called the alternative pathway for NTAP to secure NTAP. If I have breakthrough device designation, you automatically qualified for 2 of the 3 criteria for NTAP. And basically, as it is today, at least for today, if I have, and we tell clients, if I have NTAP, if you have breakthrough device designation, it's a high probability of securing NTAP. And that's been good. We've seen, because of this program, because of the devices that have received breakthrough device designation that are coming now to market, we've seen an increase absolutely in the number of technologies that have received NTAP. The problem that we now face as an industry is CMS is proposing to repeal that policy as of October 1 of this year. So about a month ago, they proposed it said we don't believe the alternative pathway is doing what we want it to do. And without a lot of real explanation, CMS said we want to repeal this effective immediately. And that is a big deal for new technologies that are coming on the market in the next 1, 2, 3, 5, and future years, because the one avenue to get incremental payment to help alleviate some of the financial disincentives that are inherent in a prospective payment system. Again, payment rates today are based off of data from 2 years ago that can't factor your cost of your technology. It takes time to catch up. That's what the NTAP is meant to bridge. Okay. But now it's going to go back to the way it used to be, where it's harder to get. So NTAP and PAT, there's an equivalent program called Transitional Pass-Through, or TPT. Again, everything has to have an acronym on the hospital outpatient side. And it's going to affect both inpatient and outpatient. And those are, as new technology, those are our primary avenues by which we can get incremental money on top of what's there established today. Typically, that is a great benefit for most of the clients I've worked with, their ability to secure one or both of the NTAP and transitional pass-through. And CMS is proposing to go kind of backwards in time to what they used to do, making it significantly more difficult for technology companies to qualify for both NTAP and transitional pass-through.
Yeah. So this and so this is really affecting companies who get breakthrough designation, which the breakthrough designation has its benefits on the regulatory side. And again, in the grand scheme of things, though, like when it comes to this versus the NTAP program, those benefits on the regulatory side are just not nearly as much as what the NTAP program was, right? Because that was the reason you did it. Like on the breakthrough side, and I'm simplifying this, so regulatory consultants don't nitpick me here, but like we're talking about days and a little bit better engagement with the FDA, but really, I don't know. I don't think it's that beneficial, like if we're talking about whether I have to plan in my budget for 60 days to get feedback versus 45, yes, it matters, but not nearly as much as qualifying, getting 2 out of the 3 things for NTAP. I mean, that's a big deal because we're talking about reimbursement and some more revenue. And so That's a bummer. I was aware of these changes, but probably not. We haven't talked about it on the podcast yet. And so it is proposed to go away October 1 of 2026. You said?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So what is? I know we talked about this on the pre-call, but what is the RAPID program? And I'm sure that's an acronym as well. And how does this relate to the alternative pathway?
So RAPID is a acronym. I just don't remember what it is yet because it just got announced. So RAPID is something different. When we go back to the three legs of the stool again, NTAP and transitional pathway have to deal with payment. Okay, that's getting the hospital more money. RAPID is meant to be coverage. So there's usually a gap between I get FDA approval and then when Medicare in this case, it's only going to apply to Medicare, is potentially covering your technology. And so it's this joint announcement from the FDA and CMS 3-4 weeks ago now that said, hey, we're going to have this big program coming out called the RAPID program where we're going to be able to close that gap. Instead of it being this big, it's going to be much smaller, and CMS is going to do things concurrently with the FDA, and they're going to figure all this out. The thing is, we don't have any details yet. We don't know who exactly will qualify. We don't know how we'll qualify. They've said maybe it's 40 devices a year. I'm not doubting that. Well, I am doubting that. I don't know how they're going to do that. I'd love to see how they do that. And that's what we need to find the details. If it's not funded, if it doesn't come with some sort of funding package from that the government is going to invest in and hire more people to administer on the CMS side, I don't know how they pull off 40 of these a year additional on what they're doing. Because they still have the pathways they have today. And now we're going to say, well, we're going to do it better. We're going to do it faster. We're going to up to 40 of these a year. Okay, well, where are they getting the resources to do that, particularly in today's environment? So the devil's in the details. They announced, the FDA and CMS said this would go through rulemaking. So they will publish what they're going to do. And everyone has the chance for a period of time, 60 days probably, to comment. They'll take those comments, make any changes they want to based on those comments, and then implement that. So until that proposed rule comes out with basically the details, what's the roadmap, who qualifies, who doesn't qualify, it's not going to be for everybody. I can guarantee you that. It's not going to be for just because I have breakthrough, I'm going to qualify. Quite frankly, I talked to a couple of clients even just today about this. I'm like, I don't think RAPID would apply to you anyway for the following reasons, given their particular situation. In their particular situation, coverage isn't really the number one issue because they're being used inpatient for other reasons and they're adjunct to the primary procedure. That's not a coverage problem. You've got a payment issue. So the NTAP, the proposal for NTAP to go away impacts anybody with breakthrough device designation. Okay. The RAPID program is going to be a smaller subset of that. We just don't know the details of it yet until CMS gives us more details that hopefully we'll get in the next month or so. Press release. So I would have expected it a little sooner than this, but it is what it is. But until those details come out, I mean, that might be another podcast at some point. Is once we know what RAPID looks like, here's how it could play out, and here's what we think it means. That could be a separate thing. But until that happens, my advice is we need to disassociate and disaggregate. There's RAPID over here for coverage. We'll see what that is. But the payment policies that are in front of us right now, like the elimination of the alternative pathway, that's going to make it significantly harder to get transitional pass-through as well as NTAP, that if people are concerned about that, which I think they should, all of them should be, any device manufacturer looking, whether it be 2 years out, next, 1 or 2 years or 3 to 5 years, the alternate pathway is a big deal if you get breakthrough.
Yeah. We know how these things go. We won't get answers on this for a while, but the RAPID stands for, I Googled it while we were chatting here, regulatory alignment for predictable and immediate device. And so a mouthful. I'm glad it's RAPID.
It's a very clever acronym, the RAPID program.
It's a very, very clever acronym. Is right.
Great.
Yeah. So I generally ask everyone a few questions at the end.
Sure.
I'm going to change mine. I always ask people, hey, if there was one thing people need to know about the U.S. healthcare system if they're commercializing in it, what would that be? Feel free to answer it. I would just encourage people to go listen to the previous 43 minutes we just talked about, because we're spending our entire time on that. Is there anything else you want to add in relation to that? If there was like a quick one hitter.
Quick one hitter would be, and this is my little stump speech, but you got till June 9th to comment to CMS about the alternative pathway. And you want to do it in writing, and it's like voting. I vote, doesn't matter what side I vote for or who I vote for, but I vote on every election because I want to complain about my elected officials when they don't do what I think they should do.
Yep. Can't
complain to CMS about what CMS's policy is going to be if you don't tell them why they should change it. And so I'm not talking about a manifesto or any sort of 75-page letter. It's a couple of pages that tell CMS, this is why it's so important that the alternative pathway remain, and you're making a mistake and all that sort of stuff. That's till June 9th. They're taking comments right now. So if you have breakthrough and that's an important part of your strategy, or you got breakthrough for your reasons, I'm with you on that. It's probably more reimbursement potentially driven than it would be regulatory driven. Well, those benefits will potentially a lot of those benefits would potentially go away October 1 unless CMS backs off of this. Well, comments matter. And that's where everyone needs to not just say, don't do this, but give them a couple of reasons why. And, people have made plans based on this pathway, and then Medicare is saying, we're going to take it away just like that. No, I can't just pivot my clinical trial suddenly and change it and say, oh, well, now my timelines don't change. The next 2 or 3 years as a startup to collect data for substantial clinical improvement, you go out of business.
Yep. 100%. So, that's an alarmingly quick turnaround.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's whether it's be grandfathering in technologies, whether it's a delay, give CMS reasonable alternatives that says we need more discussion on this for you. This is a pretty dramatic policy, a very dramatic change overnight that you can't just spring on us. That's not good. That's not good policy, is to say, wow, forget it. We're not going to do this anymore. Here's my little stump. I'll get off my soapbox now. But if anybody listening, you got till June 9th to get a letter in, and the more the better in terms of CMS, you're making a mistake, and here's why.
Yeah, I love it. I appreciate that. And to your point too, like this is not just it's not just the individual startup company that will be affected by such a quick transition and not being grandfathered in, which when there has been big policy updates in the past, especially on the regulatory side, people are grandfathered in, but that's a different division, right? And so it could be different. But the other piece of this too is like, we're not just affecting that startup and the people who work at that startup or any medtech innovator for that matter, but you're talking about all the investors who were in that. And this is like a dramatic change to that program. And so, I'm with you. I encourage people to get out there and do that. And right.
And Duane, it impacts everybody, right? It's not just startups. It's not just investors. It's the strategics who are going to be able to. It's patients for sure. We haven't really talked about that, but also, from our ecosystem perspective, these strategics aren't going to be as ready to invest or invest as much, or they'll wait longer.
Totally.
There's a trickle down. It goes both ways, so to speak, from whether I'm a small company or I'm a strategic that I'm acquiring. When NTAP potentially comes off the table, business alternative pathway, and I think that's one of the key things to potentially tell CMS is you're focused on one thing, which is the additional expenditures. Which there's no doubt, there's no question. I'm not arguing to CMS. They're spending more money than they used to because of the alternative pathway. But what they haven't talked about and haven't done an analysis of what is the benefit of bringing all of these technologies that much faster to Medicare patients? Because that's what we're trying to do here. All of us are trying to, we all want to make a living, and that's all great, but we are trying to help patients. And that's been totally lost. That's now we're just about saving a couple of bucks. Well, okay. There are other ways that you could save a couple of bucks too that you have not brought up, and that haven't been discussed. So again, lots of fodder to get CMS thinking of saying, you need to back off this. We need a delay, grandfathering, whatever that looks like, to give yourself as much chance as possible to maintain the alternative pathway that affects each individual company.
Yeah, we need more time to process what this change could look like. Yeah. Okay. On a brighter note, obviously you could tell from my background, I don't always do my podcasts at home because I have a 5 and a 2 year old, and that makes recording difficult. So I'm usually at the office, but I am at my home office sometimes, and I enjoy reading. I get most of my books from my guests, and so they'll give me a book recommendation, and I'll go purchase the book on Amazon and read it. I'm reading 2 books right now, Multipliers, and the only reason I'm reading 2 books is because one wasn't available on audiobooks, so I couldn't listen to it in the car. I had a lot of travel coming up, so I was like, hey, I'll download. I downloaded Multipliers. I'm listening to that one. I'm currently reading Science Lessons, which if you haven't read, you might enjoy it. It's from the founder of Amgen, or not the founder, but the CEO of Amgen,
Okay.
who ran the company for a while, took the company public, and it is all about creating a culture for innovation. It's a super interesting read. But I'd be curious if you had a book or 2 books that you might recommend to a person listening in.
That's a good question. I haven't been asked that about what I've been reading in a while. I don't travel as much as I used to, so I don't read as much as I used to. I got 2 kids at
Right.
home. So when I do
Yep.
travel, what I tend to do is I kind of I just reread the entire Dune series. I'm a science
Okay.
guy. So and
Yeah.
also the prequels to Dune, and the movies came out not that long ago, and was reminded how good that series of books really are. So that has been my last kind of major read when I am traveling, sitting at the airport or whatever. It's not trying to learn life lessons or anything like that, but just very entertaining for me. And it's like sort of like an escape,
Yeah.
not worry about work.
Yep.
When I work work a lot of the time, so it's like just a little bit of escape when I'm sick of watching whatever movie on the little back end of a Delta screen, and I'm not disrupting. And Tolkien, of course, as well. Every couple 3 years, I reread all of Tolkien just because it's discover
Yeah.
something every time.
So the Dune series, I have not read, but it is a huge list of books, correct?
It is. You start with the Frank Herbert and his, Dune,
Okay.
and it's, he's got like a 3 series. His son actually wrote 3 prequels that helped set up the Dune. I thought those were very interesting. And then they started to go a little wackier, quite frankly.
Okay.
They got away
Yeah.
from the story and the main character, and it's 10,000 years later, and it's sort of like, okay, now we're just introducing a whole bunch of different stuff, very
Yeah.
different and not as much of what I've expected, but still interesting stuff. So
Yeah.
some of them are more interesting than others, like any
Yep.
book. But
Yeah.
I
Super cool.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's been a good series.
Yeah, that's the first. Usually people feel the need to recommend like a nonfiction book. I always give them the option, fiction, nonfiction. It doesn't matter to me. We've had a couple science fiction ones on here, but we haven't had the Dune series yet. So
Yeah, I tend to, when I
very
do
cool.
read, I should read more. It's one of those things. Yep, I'm going to read more this year. Every New Year's, it's the same resolution, and then invariably I'm working late or whatever. I don't do it, but so
Yeah,
it's like when I do read, I'm not doing self-help books.
yeah,
I probably
totally.
should.
Yeah,
I always can use the help, but it's more
yeah,
like I just want to. Can I
yeah.
just disassociate for half an hour and just be entertained with the
Mhm.
reading, and not getting too not working
Totally.
while I read, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I totally get it. I thought for a long time that I would only ever read nonfiction. And I just started. I think my next couple books are going to be more fiction related because of this exact point. I said I had a 5 and a 2 year old, and business is, from a consulting perspective, very busy. And there's a lot of times where you have to being a consultant, you got to log on, and you might have to do some work at night because you got to meet a deadline for a startup company because they need something for someone. And to your point, I totally get it. So very cool. I'll have to check this out. Mark, hang on for 1 minute. We'll chat offline. We'll have a link in here for the JD Lymon Group's website, your LinkedIn. We're going to have hopefully some links for some of the things we discussed regarding the NTAP program, the RAPID program, Yeah, hang on for 1 second, Mark. We'll chat offline. But thanks so much for doing this today.
No, appreciate it. Thank you for the time.
Hi, I'm Freddie Coffey, Director of Marketing at Jumpstart. The Project Medtech podcast is proudly sponsored by Jumpstart Inc. Jumpstart's Trailblazer Accelerator helps Ohio's most innovative early-stage health tech startups fast-track their growth with tailored advising from serial entrepreneurs, non-dilutive funding to fuel their journey, and unrivaled access to a network of experts, resources, and investment opportunities. Whether it's improving patient outcomes, advancing digital health, or reimagining care delivery, Jumpstart provides the high-impact services and critical resources to bring big ideas to life. Learn more at jumpstartinc.org/startups.
Thank you for listening. At our core, we at Project Medtech are networkers, educators, and consultants. We meet you where you are to bring value and to create impact. We care deeply about helping medtech companies succeed right from the start, through to exit by providing consulting and fractional services, hosting impactful industry events, and of course, sharing incredible guest insights like the ones you heard today through our podcast. Please reach out at any time if we can be of assistance. Check out our website at www.projectmedtech.com or email us at info@projectmedtech.com.